got it all figured out. The people are plugged in, electrically drugged in. Dopamine receptors function like IV drips. That's click, click, click. The masters act like nurses while hiding the glitch purpose, keeping everyone lagged while they ride jags, bags and countries. Private banks in an inside-out hospital flag. Told you. Success is your own truth. Everyone benefits with hands on their own tools. Ideas of justice are from those who benefit the powers. Those powers are not you. Laws, customs, religions, the government, institutions are entire illusions. Culture's ideological function is to protect the class that owns the production. Stuck in the matrix.
Welcome to the One Dime Podcast. Today we are here with Artin Salimi, a leftist hip-hop artist who has one of the favorite YouTube channels of mine right now, where he does some badass hip-hop songs where he explains theory and philosophy and somehow does it in a non-corny way. He also does readings, skits, and voiceovers of certain theoretical concepts over some of the most wonderful hip-hop instrumentals that I've heard, which he makes himself. You can find all those videos and songs in the description through the link to his channel. Artin, who are you and what the hell do you do?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me on the show and for the generous introduction. My name is Artin Salimi. I make stop motion animation videos where two birds speak over either hip-hop instrumentals or rap over those those same beats. And the whole idea is to connect philosophy in a way that's entertaining and information in a way that's manageable and you can kind of repeat it in your head without having to sift through pages and pages of theory.
I really like the concept. It's like a kind of propaganda art, propaganda in the positive sense. Like, you know, in the old sense, all art was really propaganda to an extent. But it's like a nice way of really like conveying ideas in an entertaining way. Like, and surprisingly, someone who's probably hearing this might be thinking to themselves, hip hop, philosophy, I don't know of how these things can even go together. It sounds pretty corny. And honestly, like I couldn't imagine anybody doing it corny, but somehow you do it in a way that's like, it doesn't just work. It's like some songs actually like I would bump. I'd recommend anybody like to check it, especially if you're into this kind of theory stuff that I do on this channel.
Appreciate you. I guess for me, the thing that really got me into philosophy and theory in the first place was artists like Akala, which I know that you're aware of. And it was artists like that. Akala has this track called Fire in the Booth.
Yeah, I love that one. That one's mad.
It's like 10 years old, like 7 years old or something.
It's a really long track too.
Long, right? And then I remember just sitting down, listening to it for the first time. And anyone I know who's heard it, you do not leave that track the same person you went into. You know, and that was really for me a spark into theory and class, race, politics, you know, all these various intersections in society. And it was through hip hop, like many people, you know, many people, I'm sure they enter into questioning realities through listening to hip hop artists. And
yeah,
that's definitely been the case for me, is that, you know, like Sartre's cool, but Good Kid, Mad City is going to change you very deeply after you listen to it, you know.
And Sartre also can't rap.
Yeah.
Can't make you get turned. No, but yeah, Akala is like a really incredible rapper for those who haven't heard. As far as so-called woke rappers go, some people might think of, on a mainstream level, there's not really many, and some people might point to like Kendrick Lamar, who I would say is really one of my favorite rappers. But in terms of pure knowledge, Akala is not just woke for a rapper; he's woke for any artist and just in general. He's like the guy has read Frantz Fanon. He's read about imperialism. He'll be dropping straight up history in your songs. Like you can like maybe if you're not like super well read. You could probably learn a lot just by listening to his music, and at the same time just like have an enjoyable experience. But yeah, he's an incredible lyricist, and yeah, I recommend that. I noticed your flow when you rap. You have a heavy influence with Akala. I noticed that immediately when I heard that. And that's a compliment.
Thanks, man. Again, when you look at, he has a song called Thieves Banquet. And on Thieves Banquet, he basically plays the role of 4 people who he calls the greatest thieves of history, which are bankers, monarchs of empire, dictators of third world nations, and heads of religious orders, right? And I realized that the way a lot of the way that he flows is trying to pack in as much information as possible in the smallest amount of space. And so and he does it so effectively, to be able to kind of weave in all these very small notions of reality into these little fireball chunks. So yeah, thanks. I really appreciate that compliment.
There's not many rappers who can do that. I mean, when I was discovering a lot of rappers who are in that kind of domain, I don't like to even say woke because it has unfortunately kind of derogatory connotation.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of just serious knowledge and like of substance, he's top tier for sure. And there's artists like I know people know more of who like Immortal Technique was one of my favorites, who's also good. But I would say Akala is just on another level in terms of being consistent and packing in so much in terms of, and then his rhyme schemes too. People who are, I guess, not complete hip hop nerds like us sometimes underappreciate in hip hop what is one of the hardest things to do is to have a very complex rhyme scheme and still pack in a lot of substance. Like people like Eminem, right, are really good at rhyming so many things together, and they're one of the best at it, but often they kind of rap about nothing.
Yeah.
Whereas like there's people like, I think I would put Akala on that list. There's 2 others who I like a lot. Aesop Rock.
Oof. Yeah, definitely.
Aesop Rock is incredible.
He's like, the more you dig, the more shit there is behind it, right?
Yeah, like Labor Days. Oh man, so good. Impossible Kid. Yeah, great albums. And also I would say who's a little more famous, who's also I really like, is Lupe Fiasco. Really, really good rhymer. Yeah, I like I think it's called Tetsuo and Youth. And
Mural.
Yeah, that's like that's an incredible song. And also his first album, totally forget what it's called, but I'm sure you know it's Food and Liquor. Incredible album too.
Yeah.
If anyone who's like curious about this, who actually wants like hip hop with substance. And I don't know, I wonder how you feel about this, because a lot of people assume a lot of things about hip hop, and to an extent they're kind of right, that it's sort of a materialist genre, oversaturated with just hooks, simplistic lyrics, kind of hedonistic, materialistic, etc. But they kind of forget where hip hop came from. And it's, I would say, out as far as genres of music go, it has a big revolutionary taint to it. And what do you think about that?
Absolutely. As in, even with the quote unquote materialistic stuff, like the beats still bang, right? Like if you've had a couple of shots and you're listening to Designer, that stuff hits you different. You might think it's stupid when you're sober and you're walking around and you're like, oh, what the hell is this guy talking about? If you're looking for a good time, or there's a certain moment where it's a bit liminal, you're out of your day-to-day life, you're doing something, that kind of stuff, it hits you. And one of the advantages to not knowing English is exactly this, is that you can listen to a lot of this stuff and have a great time, because you don't know what
it's true.
You know what I'm saying? There could be some good.
Yeah, well, like some of the yeah, exactly. Like that's an interesting point, because like rap music doesn't even have to be woke, and there is like great, substantive music, but it doesn't have to be good for a certain time and place. Like there's some music, I don't know. I like to say, like me and friends like to say, like bad good music. They're not exactly good in the sense substantively, and they're often lazy, but they have they're like the best type of music for certain time and places.
Absolutely.
You mentioned designer for turning up. For me, that's future. Future
Exactly.
incorporates a certain vibe that is just unmarked by
100%,
yeah.
100%, you know. And there's a problematic notion actually, and loads of people have spoken about this, about associating music with only the revolutionary aspect of music, with only the out of pain. You know what I'm saying? Like we like to associate, think that only pain can produce good music, essentially. You know,
Mm-hmm.
whereas you know that's definitely not true. There's a lot of celebratory music. There's music that's you know, it lifts the spirits in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, there is that notion, however.
And some music's as good when you're on drugs, right?
Absolutely.
Or drunk or whatever. Like, yeah.
Absolutely. Lowering the inhibition, right? So you're like feeling it. Oh man, I'm feeling this track. You know?
It'll make you feel like you're on drugs, even if you're not.
Exactly. That like I very rarely listen to A$AP Rocky, but my friends love him.
Oh, I love A$AP Rocky. Oh my god.
There's times where honestly, if I just zone in, you feel what he felt when he recorded it. You know what I'm saying? You're just feeling a bit looser, more relaxed, and you're like, damn, this is a good time.
Yeah, it's like it's fucking weed music. That's what it is. But it's there's a time and place for that. I mean, some people there's that in like so-called white music too. It's just people might, you know, look less negatively on it because I guess like, you know, there's like a PC cleanliness associated with like white people, but like for black people it's they think degenerate, right? But it's often like there's that. And if you listen like the Beatles, right, the Beatles, well, not all their music is particularly woke. A lot of it's just about being stoned,
for sure. But that's
there's a time and place for it, right?
Absolutely. And that's you hit on an interesting point, which is the universality of whiteness, right? It's like whiteness can be anything. You know what I'm saying? It can be stoned, it can be serious, it can be all these things, whereas there's certain restrictions, you know, to put as if someone who's Arab, for example, that they have to behave a particular way. You know what I'm saying? That there's an avenue that you can go through. You play traditional music, and that's what you do essentially, you know. And that's the category that they have. Whereas whiteness has a lot of this aspect of being able to be universal, to see and become anything it wants to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. There's a lot of performativity in that, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just back to that point you made about hip hop and politics and radicalism, or any kind of radical politics. There's an interesting idea that the greatest hip hop, and I think it's Low Key who said this. He said that the greatest thing that hip hop can do is expose power. It can rap about, for example, the way the FBI works, the inner workings of the FBI. Edward Snowden, you know, all of these very class warfare, you know, and it can speak essentially
100%.
And that's the maximum. You know what I'm saying is that it just opens up a lot of these kinds of avenues that people may not be familiar with.
You know what that made me think of, and it's actually a topic of a future video, but I think one of the most underappreciated things, especially by white people, is, and it's like it's a derogatory term in and of itself, but the idea of coke rap, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is sort of a genre of hip hop music that's, you know, kind of raps about selling crack cocaine. That's, I would say, Jay-Z, Biggie Smalls, Pusha T, the Clips. Those are like, or nowadays, who one of my favorite who are in this area is Griselda.
I'm unfamiliar. Would you recommend I check them out?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's you know what you're going to get. It's like, it's coke rap, but they rhyme very well, and their beats are incredible. That's for me, the selling point is like, they have a certain intoxicating sample based type music that I really, really like. I'm always samples over 808s for me.
Nice.
Yeah. So like I love that kind of music. It's really interesting. But people will often think like, and this was especially the case in the early 2000s, is they would blame rap music for why people are selling drugs or why people are committing crimes. But what they don't understand is that music is merely just a reflection of the economic conditions that I would argue, and I want to argue in a future video, is are produced by neoliberalism. Because like quite literally, crack cocaine was drop shipped from Nicaragua in the Reagan administration, and it's not even conspiracy theory. It was what's his name, Oliver North. Yeah, Oliver North admitted to it. I mean, it's a documented thing, and really there's so much. And also there's of course unemployment that was really bad in the 80s, 90s, and also of course there's what always existed and still exists is the implicit bias in hiring people, the racial bias, which is like statistically proven too in like so many sociological studies, is that employers are biased often against like people who are non-white in hiring implicitly, and even sometimes just by looking at their names. And like all these conditions, I would say, created coke rap, gangster rap, because a lot of people were like really desperate in those communities, right? Like there's not much opportunity, and sometimes you can't even get like a minimum wage job, and even that, like a minimum wage job, if you get that, that's not going to provide for your family really. It's not even enough. So it's why it drives a lot of people to that. And what I like about the kind of a lot of the coke rap music, not all of it, but particularly early Jay-Z, Pusha T, is that they kind of, the ruggedness, the roughness exposes just how brutal the system is. And the way they paint it, it's not like, oh, you should sell crack. If anything, they kind of deter the listeners. It's like, it's what they're saying is like, the system is so bad that I did this and I had finessed through this rugged system.
Of course.
You know? And I kind of really like what that represents, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely, man. Was it renegade or penetrate pop culture, bring them a lot closer, to the book where they, and that's the narrative. It's like journalism. You're expressing it in a way that's so vivid and so good that the person listening can't not listen. They have to listen because it's so good.
Yeah, and it gives people empathy too from outside of like what these communities are like. Like that's another interesting factor. I remember there's like a Jay-Z lyric where he's kind of, and I think it was in his fourth album or third album, but it was one of the In My Lifetime albums.
Yeah.
And when he was rapping about that stuff, and he said he kind of like refuted the idea that he was selling out, which to an extent kind of true, but what he was saying is like, you're saying I sold out, but what I did is I brought this culture that white people didn't care about or know about to kind of like people are wearing do-rags and stuff.
Yeah.
Which you can say is like cultural appropriation and whatnot. But like what Jay-Z was saying is that really what was kind of just considered fringe was being more understood.
Yeah.
It's definitely co-opted too. But yeah, like a lot of people who probably wouldn't understand those conditions. Because if you watch like the media, all you see is, oh, like black people are committing crimes and like, why are they always doing that? Welfare queens, that was a big thing, right? Whereas when you hear like the music, you kind of see it from their perspective. And that's not even, you don't see that in the media, right?
Absolutely. Again, form of journalism.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's that quote also from, I think, Devils in Reasonable Doubt, one of my favorite hip hop albums of all time by early Jay-Z, where he said something like, the people who think about the underworld as easy.
Yeah,
like
the mechanics of the working of the underworld. Granted, 9 to 5 is how you survive. I ain't trying to survive. I'm trying to live it to the limit and love it a lot. That is insane, man. That is absolutely crazy.
You got it.
That shit keeps me up at night, man.
I love that lyric because it's like, it's not like people might think that it's a cop out, but like selling drugs is probably like it's a big risk.
Yeah.
And it's not like the easy route by any means, but sometimes it's like, it comes out of a sense of desperation and also ambition.
For
to
sure.
not put up with those conditions that like capitalism limits people to, right? And I think it encapsulates it well.
But there's a shift happening, or that has happened, right? Is that there's, I'm sure you've seen articles writing about this, where they're talking about how in the 90s, for example, you were seen to be an absolute idiot if you took the drugs that you sold. So if you're selling
Yeah.
cocaine, you don't take cocaine. Like taking cocaine is seen as like a big no-no, right? And
Yeah,
there's a slow change.
you don't get high off your own supply.
You don't get high off your own supply, absolutely. But there's a slow change that's happened where now, if we listen to a lot of artists, they're talking about consumption. They're not talking about production. It's the aspect of hustle has been replaced in a way that actually your consumption reflects how much of a producer you are.
Well, yeah, it's like I would say that there's an interesting theoretical lens you could look at this with, because like that is a really interesting shift. Is like we you know, people will say that's with mumble rap, but I would say it kind of took place like a little bit earlier, I guess you could say, kind of with Lil Wayne. Like little Wayne's music, and then after that, and it was like less about, you know, saying I'm doing this for whatever, like to support my family or whatnot. It was kind of like, yeah, I'm getting off these drugs, man. And it's like you see that obviously with like mumble rap and stuff like that. It's like consumption, and that's where you see all like the hedonism embodied. And I think, you know, it's emblematic a lot of what Baudrillard discusses in his work, kind of like the shift away from like capitalism as a system of production, which it is ultimately, but like the shift in how what drives capitalism is consumption, which materially you could say that was really ever since 1980s, but it was definitely manifested more in the 2000s, because by the 2000s, so much of production jobs were like shifted overseas to exploit the global South and Asia. That you know, like it became America's economy was fueled on consumption. And I think on a symbolic level, the hip hop music somewhat kind of embodies that. It's like, you know, it's consumption, right? It's in a neoliberalism, and I think also Mark Fisher's work discusses in the chapter called Marxist Super Nanny. Yeah, where it's like the neoliberal motto is kind of, you should always be enjoying. Always enjoying. And it's like, you're doing something wrong if you're not enjoying. You have to consume, always have, you know, your best lifestyle, whatever. And like, yeah, it's less about, you know, hustling, and it's more about, you know, just like it's representation kind of like hedonism, consumption, all of that. It's not something new, but I would just say like in the 2000s, mid 2000s, that's when it just manifested into that, like that already existing trend manifested into hip hop, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's that have you seen Once Upon a Time in Brooklyn? Very old movie. Robert De Niro.
I haven't, but I've heard of it.
And the kid's like, the working man's a sucker because he hangs around with the mafia, and then they tell him basically, you know, you don't want to be producing, essentially. You know, you want to be wearing nice clothes, you want to be drinking this, you want to smoke this. And there is this mentality of essentially that if, of course, this is a bit of a cliche, but if you don't have, then you are less, essentially. The less you have, the less you are. And the more, and subsequently, the more you have, the more you are. And there's, you know, this trend, again, you can see it change in post-World War II America, where suddenly you had something like Playboy magazine, for example, which was considered to be crazy pre the war, you know, which was much more about rugged self-negation. You're supposed to be hard worker who just doesn't spend much, isn't frivolous. And yet suddenly there was a shift where suddenly it was okay for a man to take care of himself, for example. It was okay for a man to wear beach clothes, to go to the gym. And suddenly a lot of these shifts happened where, as you say quite rightly, consumption became motive number one to keep the production going. And right now we are witnessing this in music. So like The Weeknd, for example. He literally,
I like The Weeknd, but I think he does reflect that in his music. I think somewhat intentionally.
what I'm about to say about The Weeknd is no reflection to his talent. The guy.
Oh yeah, yeah,
But yeah, I can't feel my face.
yeah.
To the point where you don't even know whether it's a cry for help or whether it's he's just showing off by the fact that he's done so much coke and he's living the lifestyle that everyone dreams of, yet he's not happy. And isn't that the story? Isn't that the concept?
Yeah, man. Well, I was about it right when you brought up The Weeknd. I thought of when Mark Fisher talks about depressive hedonia or depressive adhedonia. So like that's kind of like a play on the mental condition, which is called depressive hedonia, which is that you can't get pleasure. But depressive adhedonia is you can't get pleasure. But he talks about depressive hedonia as more the condition of our time, and that we can't. Well, I guess you could say it's like a cultural condition that's more and more pervasive, that we can't get anything except pleasure. That's kind of also a condition of the consumer society. And like, as you're saying, that's totally embodied in Weeknd's music. And I think like his best projects I found were is like Trilogy, the first mixtape. That music, the What You Need, or a House of Balloons. Yeah, House of Balloons. Yeah, so good. Like it's kind of like it's also, you know, it's an extent showing off like, oh, I'm living this, but there's like he's not hiding the fact that he's depressed, and he's in fact like crying for help.
Yeah,
it's super dark. I think my favorite song is definitely Initiation on that whole Trilogy album. Is like, yeah, it's kind of like it's the thing about neoliberalism, right, is it is a consumer society, and on the representational level, we want to televise all the positive aspects, but it's also the source of much of our depression. And that's there's another one of my favorite thinkers who's kind of like German Mark Fisher. His name is Byung-Chul Han. And he has the book called the Burnout Society.
Okay.
Yeah, and he talks about like excess positivity is like a problem, and like and it sounds like, yeah, and it's like in the sense that like everything, like the just overwhelming pressure to always enjoy. I mean, it's also kind of what Zizek says, right? But also in general, like literal positivity, you know, like, how are you doing? It's always supposed to be like great, whatever. And like you're on social media, you're always supposed to televise the good things. Exactly. One thing I do appreciate about The Weeknd is like, while he's like showing off, like he's kind of also showing like the duality to it, right?
Yeah, for sure. Which is like, it's the kind of music you can imagine a soundtrack to where you're really drunk, but you had a bad time and you're walking home. And you're like in a state where it tells both sides of the coin. Essentially, it tells you, like, I'm materially satisfied, I'm attractive, I'm this and that, but at the same time, this is the reality that comes with it. And again, it's when I say reality that comes with it, again, noting back to Fisher, for example, where he talks about, I think this is one of my favorite bits of capitalism realism, where he talks about realness. You know,
I love that. That was about hip hop, right? Where he cites that journalist.
Yeah, exactly. Keep it real, right? That's crazy. Like even the time where it's like.
Well, I would say that's like not even like, that's definitely the condition of like, I guess you could say hip hop in the 90s, 2000s. But like then it became that kind of, I think, okay, this is like all like, it's funny because this is like a future topic of mine in my videos, but like,
you can give the
kind of, the keep it real thing, right? That in a sense is like, it's still trying to preserve the reality principle. And it's in a sense modernist, but in postmodernism, as we get more postmodernist, that fizzles out completely. And there's not even pretending to be real. Like now you have 6ix9ine, right?
Yeah. No, this is the thing again with like Drake's Ghostwriter, right? No one. Nobody cares at all whatsoever. You know, back in the day there was repercussions. Now it's like, whatever, man. Let him do what he's doing.
Yeah, and it's to an extent I view this as like kind of a bad thing, but also kind of a good thing. I just see how it is. Like it is what it is, right? But like it's in the case of ghostwriting, I would say it's probably a bad thing. But like I just find it funny with Tekashi 6ix9ine. I think he's the quintessential postmodern rapper
Yeah.
because like the thing is yeah, he was trying to like seem gangster, but like no one believed it. And what's so funny is that it turned out he kind of was.
He is. He's about this life.
Yeah, but then people still didn't take it seriously.
Yeah.
And then what I found the funniest is the fact that when he snitched on everybody to kind of get himself out of prison, everybody thought that this is down for this guy's career. Like, oh, he's gonna get killed.
And he made a song with Nicki Minaj as soon as he
and he's like more popular after.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like nobody gives a shit.
Yeah, no one cares. No one cares. And this is again, it's another cliche, but it's just the rapid pace of information. You know what I'm saying? Like nowadays, a stain doesn't really last too long. It comes today, gone tomorrow, and that's a lot of my friends fear that with regard to the people trying to mess up Reddit, trying to mess up the hedge funds, right? That people are going to forget about it. Like there was this collective action to make people lose billions, and it was effective. And people are going to forget about it in a couple of weeks' time.
Yeah, I didn't actually aim to talk about this, but that's actually it's not really the topic of my next video. But my actual next video is on the stock market. It's not really about the GameStop thing because that's oversaturated. But I thought it's a good time to like talk about the stock market from a sort of Marxian perspective.
Wicked.
And what it is and whatnot, but yeah, it's what's summary. Basically, the stock market is welfare for the rich, right? To a large extent is, and there is something interesting about like the whole GameStop thing is that they're kind of using capitalism's own contradiction to sort of stick it to the hedge fund managers, because like in actual capitalism and the laws that exist, there's nothing actually stopping just a bunch of people from being like,
absolutely,
fucking, we're gonna buy this dead stock and I'll make money from it.
Bailing people out is anti-capitalist because you remove risk. So there's supposed to be risk involved, so there's innovation, and so other people can come and compete. But if you remove risk, then it's anti-capitalist. But yet again, it's a contradiction that doesn't seem to be much highlighted on.
Yeah, and also the idea that that's another thing I'm going to touch on is like the idea that everybody can just use the stock market like meritocratically and get rich is a myth, because by definition, bubbles form when too many people buy one thing and there's no more sellers, there's no more buyers, and it's only like sellers left. Then the bubble collapses like in one day. That's what happened in the 90s, in 99, 2000. So it's like, it's like a myth that like it's meritocratic because like these can form. But it is funny that like back to what we were saying about the reality principle, the kind of principle of like the principles dying to an extent. And like that is funny because with the GameStop, in actuality, there's nothing really stopping a bunch of people from just buying a dead company and just being like, we're gonna make some bucks and like fuck you guys, hedge funds. But like there's all these like economic neologisms like efficient market hypothesis, or the idea that stocks are somehow related to the company's value. Dude, that is a complete myth. Like look at Tesla. Okay, Tesla, I would looked up, is like worth more than all of the car companies combined. Who do you know drives a Tesla? Teslas are cool, by the way. But like it's like it's like simulacrum, if you know what I mean. Like stocks are a form of simulacrum. Yeah,
absolutely.
And 6ix9ine is the simulacrum of hip hop artists. But yeah, changing the subject, since you were talking about your influences, I'm curious who your top 10 favorite rappers are, in terms of just not who you think are the best, maybe objectively, but just who your favorites are. Sure. Like top 10 all time. Top 5, top 10's all hard.
Top 5, sure. So I just have to say, so a lot of my favorite rappers are actually Iranian rappers, but I won't mention any of those. But if anyone has the time who's listening to this, just check it out. It will change your life, even though if you don't understand it. Top 5 English-speaking rappers. I definitely have to put Kendrick, Low-Key, Akala. Sweatshirt, man, forget it. Forget it. I keep forgetting him every time I mention this, but
He's on mine too.
he actually was a big influence on me. And probably Getz, as in Getz is a grime artist from London. And but he's the best. He's the best in his of his craft, you know. And anyone who's listening, you probably heard of the other four, but Getz, Ghetts. Check him out. He's amazing.
Yeah, I'll have to get you to send me those Iranian rappers after, because I'm curious. Like, I didn't even know there was an Iranian rap scene.
Yeah, it's absolutely out of here, man. It's a form of resistance, you know. It's anti. Again, we'll get onto that. We'll get onto that. Who are your top 5?
Okay, so well, you mentioned one of them. Earl Sweatshirt is like one of my favorites, at least of like this generation's rappers.
Yeah,
for sure. Like, he's an incredible lyricist, very introspective. Yeah, like that was definitely like great music for me when I was younger, especially. I still like it. After that, I would say Common. Between Common and Mos Def, but I would choose Common out of like 90s rappers, because Common has such a better discography, like a bigger discography.
Sure.
And not all of it's great, but I would say he has like 4 amazing albums that I love. Like B, produced by Kanye. Resurrection, that's a slept on album by Common. Resurrection, I think, is when Common is at his most lyrical. Like, people forget, I think ever since he became an actor, there was sort of like a Ice Cube effect that happened. You know, like, people just don't take you seriously when you become an actor, I guess.
Yeah.
And he kind of, he became like whatever, Hollywood and normie, but like he was like one of like a really good rapper, like a impeccable lyricist, and with a lot of substance too. Like, I think Resurrection, incredible songs on that album, and also the Water for Chocolate. It's another classic. Yeah, like Common is up there for me. Then after that, I would say Danny Brown. That's my wild card.
Danny Brown's the guy. He's the guy. And the worst thing is, I can't get people to listen to him.
He's a grower.
Listen to this. Listen. And they're like, dude, what do you hear? The guy's just talking nonsense. I'm like, no, but listen.
Yeah, he's like, it's hard to really, it's like Death Grips, right? It's really hard to get people into Danny Brown, because he has like a really annoying voice. But what people don't get is when he has that like kind of like voice, like Looney Tune on crack voice.
Yeah.
It's kind of like it's performance art. So like when he does that voice, he's like on drugs when he's supposed to be on drugs anyway. When he's doing that voice, his actual voice is like completely different, and he uses both of them in his music. Like, his music is like I think I'll say flat out the best performance art in hip hop.
Yeah.
And like the way he kind of describes, and not just in his words, but also in the beats he chooses, puts it together, the flows, just the embodiment of intoxication.
Yeah, exactly. He reminds me of did you ever play Crash Bandicoot?
Yes. Oh my God. Yeah, like just straight ADHD.
Yeah. Exactly. You should definitely do a music video where he's like the aesthetic is like a 90s PlayStation 1 game. I think that would be crazy.
He is like such a weird character, because it is like some kind of like a cartoon character, like in a, like you'd find in like Robot Chicken or something, like, like late night, like the kind of cartoons you're not supposed to be watching.
Are you into Death Grips, man?
Yeah.
Oh, sick.
I like the Money Store the best, for sure.
Yeah, Money Store is amazing. It's hard to find Death Grips fans these days.
Yeah, well, they're hard to get into. Like, I used to think like Death Grips was just like hipster stuff that people pretended to like to be cool or whatever. But like I was just confused, because I had a friend who used to listen to all kind of weird shit, and some of it was like terrible. Like, I don't know if you heard of the Viper.
No. But I definitely fuck with Death Grips heavy, man. I think that stuff is just crazy. And the best thing about it, in my opinion, is that no album is alike. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah,
such a shift in the way that the music's produced, and I think that's just incredible, man.
Yeah, I like them both. They're completely different. But I would say, okay, after Danny Brown, I would put it's between. I would say Atmosphere.
Atmosphere is the guy who signed to Rhymesayers? Am I
Yeah,
right?
he owns Rhyme
He owns
Sayers.
Rhymesayers, yeah.
Yeah, they started. It was like that. Like MF Doom signed to that label. It's like a independent like.
Anyone who needs to be a genius can join, kind of shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really good. Like Atmosphere, it's like a group, but it's like the rapper is Slug, who's an incredible MC, like introspective. It's like a very different thing he represents. If anything, I would say he's kind of like the Midwest working class type music.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not like you people might think of that. They might think of, I don't know, like Yellow Wolf or like Machine Gun Kelly, but that's not at all. Like this guy can like rap really well. Like he can rap really well, and it's also like it's storytelling. Like there's
Machine Gun Kelly and Yellow.
If I had to give one more, I would say it is Lupe Fiasco.
Lupe is sick. I got turned on to Lupe real late, bro. Really late.
So like when he was bad. his third album was like that's like his famous one. That one's like whack as hell. He even admits it's whack.
Yeah. No, I got turned on to him late, but I'm slowly getting there.
I would say the first album, and then the honestly, actually, his last album is really good too. The one about slavery. That one's really, really good too. It's like a genealogy of like slave trade. It's like a crazy concept.
That's amazing, man. Yeah, he was always. My friends often say this. They say that he would have been Kendrick if he just came out a couple of years later. Like he was too soon for his own good.
Yeah, I think that's also why he's a bit kind of salty and always has something to prove. Is because he doesn't get the credit he quite deserves, because I think at the same time he didn't really get recognized on a mainstream level because people forgot about him after his hits, and because of his few hits, which to be honest aren't like bad, but they're kind of like whatever. It's like he has one album that's like sounds super like mainstream, if you know what I mean, and like poppy, and he kind of lost a lot of like respect back when the reality principle still existed.
Exactly. See, this is again, and also because he wasn't in the kind of social media age where you can just like shift. Like I feel like during that era, there was only two options for you at that point. If you are a quote unquote conscious rapper, you either make Lil Wayne tunes or you just go underground. You know what I'm saying? Whereas like, and that's soon after there was this kind of much more of a blend that happened, which is why you get people like Kendrick, in my opinion.
Yeah, really, that 2010 to 2013 time, like Absol, Danny Brown, Earl Sweatshirt, even like Mac Miller. Like early Mac Miller is whatever, like college pop, but like I would say Mac Miller like got really good after his like fourth or third album. It was I like that era a lot.
For sure, man. For sure.
Who are your top 5 producers? Because you make your own beats, which for anyone who doesn't know the process, it's not just hard to rap well, it's hard to do both. So I have major respect for people who also make beats and rap. So who are your influences when it comes to producing?
Okay, so I'm gonna tell you my favorite producer of all time, and whoever's listening to this, write this down and listen to his music. It's Mahdyar, Mahdyar. Last name Aghajani, Aghajani. And he was the first producer at the age of 16 to make the first Iranian hip-hop album and produce the entire thing. Like he's like a prodigy.
What?
And he was the first person to use the entire album is made purely from traditional Iranian instruments that he sampled.
Sampling to me is like the reason why I like sample-based music is because I also like older music too. So when I see like old music being kind of reworked into like a completely new tune, it's just some of the most beautiful stuff.
Absolutely, and he's a leftist, which adds to the glamour. And he actually has his most recent album is called Seized, and it's all this kind of concept. But he basically, after that era, he started to mix like dubstep with traditional Iranian instruments in a hip hop beat. So he's just constantly bringing universes together in his music, and that's my most inspiring thing, is to like bring something from various like electronic with traditional and just create something crazy. So yeah, that's definitely number one. Ash Kusha makes some of the most crazy. Like he describes it as he makes music that computers can enjoy. So it's kind of like if AI was to listen to music, this is the kind of music they listen to. Really interesting. Kanye West, of course, the king. I can't really think of anyone who's flipped samples that well.
He produced B, so it was really good.
Exactly. J. Cole, man, I'm not gonna lie to you. J. Cole, is an amazing producer, man. Like God's gift is one of the craziest samples. It's just like a Portuguese woman singing, and the way he's just flipped this to sound like the most ill thing on the planet is just insane. So yeah,
interesting.
Yeah, J. Cole's definitely up there. And I would also producers is much more difficult, man.
What about Madlib? Madlib is one of my top 5.
For sure.
Madlib. Like the producer for MF Doom. Yeah, he's incredible. And Freddie Gibbs, like I also really like Freddie Gibbs because in the albums that Madlib produces for him, or like Pinata, oh, so good,
crazy. I put Lotic as number 5, Lotic, and they make like it's out of this world, man. Like this is the kind of music that when I'm really into it, I feel like it's one of those out of body experience kind of moments, man. Like the music just takes you there. It's really, really
wow. So Lotic, like LOW
LOTIC, yeah. And they have I have to also warn the audience and yourselves. This is not easy listening. This isn't like, oh, let's put on a track. This is like heavy shit. And I definitely recommend the song called Underneath. It's just check it out when you have time.
Nice.
How would
I'd say Madlib, Alchemist. Alchemist is really, like I love his Alchemist samples. He's done some stuff for Griselda too, that Coke rap I was telling you about, as well as No ID. I really like. No ID did a lot of work for Common. And from Atmosphere, Premier, DJ Premier.
You're a classic,
Primo.
You're a classical lover of classics.
And also, I really like Pharrell. Like Pharrell was like big on my childhood.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Like I love the Neptunes, and I also really like Clips, like Pusha T's original group.
Yeah.
Like those 2 albums are amazing. Like Pharrell has some way of just making you move.
Yeah, for sure.
It's really nice. But yeah, you are like, I know this of course because we were talking, and you also brought up many Iranian rappers. You come from an Iranian background.
Yeah.
How has that shaped your views politically? And also, is there any perspective that you would like to bring when it comes to politics in Iran, especially as it pertains to leftism? Because I think there's like, I don't know as much about the situation as I would like to, beyond a little bit. And I'm sure most people just don't know at all beyond, of course, US-Iranian tensions.
Yeah. So Iran had a leftist party called Tudeh, which was the Communist Party before the revolution. And they were very much, the majority of the faction was pro-Soviet. So it was still during that time where, USSR and whatnot had mass credibility, and this was supposed to be the way forward. And, but one of the things that they didn't necessarily have as much was the charisma of someone like Khomeini, who was the leader of the revolution, and also the kind of ability to draw out religious fervor. So I have a video called "How Heidegger Influenced the Iranian Revolution."
Yeah,
and
it's a great video.
I kind of allude to that in this, and that, you know, the communists at the time had a very materialist perspective. They believed in history as a form of mechanics, essentially,
and also anti-religion, right? Which probably didn't go well.
Which in the Middle East, you have to be nuanced. I don't care if you're the most Marxist motherfucker out there. You have to be nuanced about people's beliefs and the fact that, especially during that time, people were moving from rural areas into cities. That's culture shock. That's massive shock, right? And so if there's someone who represents all of, you know, modernity, and someone who's able to tell you that they're going to flip back the clock, then that seems very appealing. And essentially, one of the main kind of things that brought Khomeini out was this idea that he was able to record his lectures. He was in exile in Iraq, and he would record his lectures on cassettes and tapes, and those tapes would flood the streets and the mosques. And so you're just listening to someone who's telling you about what's going wrong, but also the way that there's going to be a solution to it. Very much in the same way that these days a lot of Iranian rappers and artists will put their music up on SoundCloud and talk about issues of society, and people feel the problems and are able to kind of navigate it. Although it's not like a lot of the hip hop isn't religious in any sense, you know.
And it isn't some of it also pretty anti-state?
Oh yeah, absolutely. But not, it can't, like, for those people who are outside of the country, they're able to be as, you know, as they want. But if you're in Iran, then you can only talk about social issues.
Interesting. Speaking of just political thought in general, and because we did top fives, I'm curious what your top 5 favorite theories / philosophies, thinkers broadly, are in terms of just who influences you politically in terms of how you think, or even philosophically more broadly, because you cover a wide array of thinkers on your channel, such as Nietzsche, George Lukács, Laclau and Mouffe, Baudrillard, Hegel. More broadly, who influences you?
Marcuse is a huge influence on me. Nietzsche. I would say Marx, but I would be lying, because I've read much more Marxist theorists than Marx. Like, I've read more
Me too.
theorists than actual Marx and stuff. So I wouldn't say.
I have read some Marx, but like the thing is I learned most of my Marx actually from David Harvey.
Exactly.
Yeah. I found it a lot easier. And also Terry Eagleton has really good stuff. Yes. And also like the Marxist Engels reader, stuff like that. Because like Marx is like just being honest, like at least in terms of capital, so boring to read.
Absolutely. It wouldn't survive today's publications. They'd be like, come on, man, jazz it up. Who else? I would say Derrida, definitely. Derrida
really
fucked me up, man. Yeah, Derrida's
wow.
I always say when I'm too certain about things, I read Derrida. When I'm too uncertain, I read Nietzsche. And I sort of try and find a balance there.
Interesting. I would say that's like Foucault for me, the uncertain. Yeah, because like order of things, that's what order of things did to me. Like, you know, when people say history has always been like this or whatever, just like history is, I will never utter such a sentence ever. Yeah, it's like you just notice all the contradictions and stuff, and like how we make assumptions. Yeah, that's good. But Derrida, that's a hard thinker to get into. I haven't read him directly. I've read a guide on him. That's about it. I plan to get more into him, but he's just like like very difficult to read from what I've heard anyway. It's like he just writes in metaphors.
Exactly, and his form is part of his philosophy. You know, it's supposed to make you think differently, but not in a way that, you know, when sometimes you read something and it's different knowledge to what you're used to. Like, this isn't just different knowledge; it's like a whole other language that you're reading. And when
it's like new goggles. Would you say that? That's how I view theory more broadly. It's like it's not knowledge. It's like ways of viewing knowledge.
exactly, and these very different, you know, he has like epistemic terms within his text, and you're just that I feel like that dizziness is part of Derrida. You know,
who else would you say? You said Nietzsche, Derrida, Marx.
Who else?
Well, I find it funny that it's you said Nietzsche, because I also really like Nietzsche, but for me the reason I put kind of Foucault gives me what, like, in terms of what I like about Nietzsche is in Foucault. Do you know, if you know what I mean? Like, so what I like the most, what my favorite text of Nietzsche is Genealogy of Morals.
Oh yeah, big.
Because, and it's that I went to Catholic school, which wasn't like super, like, you know, super religious or anything, but I remember I could never like go to mass again after that. And but also I just hated like a lot of philosophy, like, because I think I always hated, my least favorite part of philosophy has been ethics. And I always feel like ethics, you know, is like, to an extent, it has it's just water, it's muttered, there's so much muddy waters with it, and it's so subjective, and it's often just used by people in power, which is why I like Foucault, right? Is like Foucault kind of shows how like a lot of supposed knowledges or norms are just, you know, ultimately like, you know, established by people in power and, you know, circulated and maintained for the purpose of maintaining a power.
Exactly.
Right. And I feel, yeah, Nietzsche does that early on. And it's also like, I find the left needs some Nietzsche in general, because like, I don't think you can critique capitalism morally. Like, moral critiques are so useless. Capitalism has no morals.
Absolutely. And again, it's part of his writing. Like, when I read Nietzsche, there are times where I have to put the book down. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just like, you know, and that it is because the form is really powerful. And if anything, Nietzsche's really good in terms of form, because it doesn't, a lot of leftist writers, in my opinion, they zigzag on issues. So they'll have like one paragraph, and then instead of elaborating on it, they'll move to another. Whereas Nietzsche is like, okay, this is an onion. You're gonna.
He's easy to read, for sure.
And I'm just gonna peel this onion until we get to its core. I'm not gonna move from this onion, you know. And he's able to just clarify after each paragraph, which is just crazy, you know.
I find Nietzsche is like, the way I describe him is he's like the easiest to read, but so easy to be misunderstood.
Yeah.
And that's like Freud too. I think it's because like a lot of people can just pick up his work and find ways, because I would say politically he's super contradictory, because I would say while he's like super anti-left, right? And you show that in your recent like with George Lukash's analysis. And I like that was interesting, because I always knew he was reactionary. That's kind of why I didn't really like his political views. His sort of elitist, you know, a little bit kind of, in many ways, individualistic fetishizing of like the Ubermensch and like
exactly
all of that. Like, I always found it's like, oh man, like the worst people are going to read this and they're going to be like, yeah, like, you know, oh, like it's like honestly, like to an extent, like kind of dangerous. Like literally, I know it's like it can really induce a Dunning-Kruger effect, because like some like person who's like kind of like, you know, not the brightest bulb, like might just go read that and they're like, yes.
Yeah.
Like, so there's a lot of problems I have with it, but I like that video
in the 20th century. Oswald Mosley, Hitler, Mussolini, all the fascists.
Jordan Peterson loves Nietzsche, and I find that so bizarre because, like, I mean, in terms of like Peterson's kind of moral philosophy or whatnot, or like, and also like his truth, like Peterson always talking about like truth,
Yeah.
or like don't. It's so much of like I could see Nietzsche would probably devote so much like just ripping apart 12 Rules of Life. It's like it's so
For sure.
yeah. It's fun. It's funny. Like a lot of people who it's because he's contradictory, right? His political views are, I would say, right wing, but Nietzsche, I argue this many times, is that he's the first postmodernist
Mm-hmm.
because he's like a modernist philosopher, right? But what I mean is he's like one of the first anti-modernity
Oh yeah.
philosophers.
You're looking at you're looking at history with lenses, and he just comes and takes those lenses away, and you're just naked. You're just looking at things in a completely vulnerable way because he's taking that tool of analysis away, where you can create these grand gestures. You know what I'm saying? And he
Yeah.
completely leaves you with a sense
Well,
of
it's like post-structuralism too, right? With words, like you will never think like, say, oh, do you think this is good or bad? Or, when people have like, surface level conversations and using terms like, um, that they're using so many terms to make assertions that they don't even know what these terms mean
for sure.
in a historical sense or how they're using them. It's like, it depends. It's these terms didn't mean the same thing. And I always like how he like traces the genealogy of words like strong, right? Kind of,
Yes,
yeah, it's really good stuff.
absolutely.
Did you think of any others? Because I have some mine that are pretty easy.
Yeah, hit me up with yours, man.
Well, I would say number one for me is definitely Baudrillard.
Yeah.
Because I've never read a thinker like Baudrillard and legitimately been just I didn't view anything the same ever again.
Don't you find it very depressing?
Yeah, but that's why I don't really read philosophy to like,
To uplift your spirit.
yeah, and if you're trying to do that, like your philosophy is not for you. Like, I mean, it's like if anything, Baudrillard's kind of a Nietzschean too,
Yeah,
like
sure.
like the way Foucault is, because a lot of all the postmodernists, a lot of them, well, most postmodernists didn't even describe themselves as that, but and some of them I wouldn't even say are really postmodernists. Like I don't think Deleuze is really a postmodernist. I don't really think Derrida to an extent, but I would say like the real postmodern theorists are Baudrillard and Foucault because they really make you question reality, truth as a whole, like objective. And the thing is when I first started reading Baudrillard, I was mind blown by a lot of things, but there's one part of Baudrillard most people don't get, and I still didn't get at the time. And when I got this, which I didn't really understand this till I read what's called The Intelligence of Evil,
I haven't
and
read.
also Passwords and Simulations, which is like the little version of Simulacra and Simulation.
Okay.
So, because like I find if you just do Simulacra and Simulation, you'll get some, but there's one thing I just totally, it's hard. It's like very counterintuitive. But the thing is Baudrillard doesn't, he's not mourning the death of truth and reality and like, oh, technology bad, media lies. What Baudrillard describes as the thing, and this is so counterintuitive, and he's more explicit about it in his later works, because in his later works he kind of repeats the same thing in different ways, but it's because he wasn't clear in Simulacra and Simulation, and as a result you have so many people totally bastardizing his work. So like what he's saying is like there's too much real.
Yeah.
Everything is realized, like if the way I would look at it, like there's less room for imagination. Everything can be televised, realized, made into quote unquote reality. And there's what is dying from reality is reversibility and illusion. Illusion is the reversibility. So we get what he calls non-conflictual reality or integral. So it's like, if you look at it like this way, kind of everything is realized. I like to use social media, but even though he was writing before it, it's just so much easier to exemplify. But sort of everything being mediatized, televised, there's no reversibility in the illusion. Whereas like when you look at it, like when you read a book, a large part of it is illusion. There's a low level simulacrum in the sense that words are explaining something, but you have to imagine the stuff in your head.
Yeah.
You have to conceptualize it. But everything realized, it's like you'll notice like how relevant that is to our time and how terrifying that is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, and how I think movies like The Social Dilemma completely get it wrong. It's like they'll say, "Oh, we're losing our democracy. Oh, we don't believe in truth," and it's like, like they kind of they miss it. They're like, "Oh, we just need to log off our phones."
I haven't seen it. What's it about?
It's about kind of it touches upon a real issue. It's on Netflix, but it's about social media making people depressed, kind of the far right populism, stuff like that.
Okay.
Post-truth. But yeah, like I don't want to go too much on Baudrillard, but definitely like I would say he's also someone Marxists need to read too, because I think if you focus too much on like quote unquote reality in political analysis, you might actually get sidetracked.
Yeah.
Like some people will say, oh well, Trump's not like fascist in the sense because Obama did the same thing. So if Trump's a fascist, Obama's a fascist. Well, it's like, no, it's like Trump's like fascism has always been kind of like rhetoric, right? Ideological rhetoric, like us versus them, other. And Trump's kind of like a simulated parody of fascism in many ways.
Again, if you were to recommend one text from Baudrillard, what would you recommend people read?
Intelligence of Evil or The Perfect Crime, because those ones kind of like really, I think, get his point across easier.
Okay.
There's also Passwords where he sums up all his concepts, but I would say The Perfect Crime and definitely Intelligence of Evil for sure. Either of those.
Cool.
Yeah, they're not that long, but their Simulacra and Simulation is so easy to misunderstand.
I've been recommended Intelligence of Evil, which is such an amazing title, right?
Yeah, it's really there's a guy who reads. He does something similar to what you do. Because you know how you like in your last one you're kind of reading a bit of Lukács and also giving your takes with your instrumentals. There's a guy I really like and called Steady Delta.
Okay.
He does music. I've plugged his stuff a bit. He basically reads like texts. He reads some Baudrillard, Debord, and like people like that, and he does like his cool like ambient music behind it.
Okay.
And he has one chapter of Intelligence of Evil in there. Like if you want a sneak peek for any of the listeners as well, like that it's like it's so intriguing. You'll probably understand only like 20% or less, but that's enough to already be very interested.
Okay, wicked, cool. I'll check it out.
Did you think of any others?
Philosophers.
Yeah, or theorists, broadly thinkers. Because for me, I also really like Lacan.
Oh, I see. This is the thing. I used to be really into psychoanalysis, but that's kind of wavering as I'm getting older.
Why is that?
Mainly because it's I don't know. There seems to be a level of complexity that psychoanalysis makes me feel very comfortable. You know what I'm saying? Like
What?
because it explains phenomena theoretically.
I find it the opposite. It's like I could never look at if I look if you like learn about Lacan and Freud and then you start I don't know if you start getting some concepts and then you go through your old like your camera roll your photos and you'll just look at yourself so different. You'll be like, oh man,
exactly.
You'll know exactly what you were thinking. Yeah, and you also read people better. You might read yourself better. I find it like it's not comforting at all, but it's like it's useful. I think it's really practical.
What I mean by comforting isn't feeling good, but it's like having answers to things. You know?
Yeah.
It intellectually comforting. Like it provides answers to things where you're like, oh, okay, this is that. It might be a horrible fact. It might be an awful fact. But it provides a certain level of answers. And these days, like shit is just so complicated. Like when I look into anything in detail, I just get too bewildered. You know what I'm saying? Like everything has so many different layers to it, and there's so many different aspects of interpretation. It doesn't mean that materially these things aren't quote unquote real, but the level of analysis and interpretation that you can take from it I generally just try and not fix it and say this is it absolutely. You know what I'm saying? To say this is this.
Well, I would say it's also kind of, doesn't it open up more answers?
Psychoanalysis.
And philosophy more, but the thing is, I think Lacan definitely brings more answers because, like, you know, who I like to juxtapose a lot is Carl Jung versus Lacan, because I think one of the things I don't really like about Jung, although I'm not as well read as I'd like to be, it's just my sort of impression from guides, and especially the type of people who kind of say they like Jung is that it tends to like give answers to things. Like it's like, oh, these are the archetypes.
Yeah.
This is your purpose. This is, oh no, this is just your shadow manifesting.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, I just don't, I always hate that kind of late capitalist spirituality, if you know what I mean.
Absolutely. Like, I'm definitely on board with that.
Yeah. But whereas like Lacan, it's like dark as hell.
Yeah. There's no catharsis. It's just that goes through. But again, this is with regards to psychoanalysis. I think that the one thing that it does definitely helps with, in my opinion, for me anyway, is it allows you to see where you might be bullshitting yourself. Because I'm I'm really good at bullshitting myself. And so
well, anyone who's been in like grad school, I'm sure, or a university in general, like, yeah,
like
or honestly, job interviews, man.
Exactly. You just have to perform, right? And
well, there's an artist, there's a thinker. I don't want to drop too many names, but there's a thinker whose whole project is that, if you're interested, is Erving Goffman.
Goffman.
Yeah, the presentation of self of everyday life. He's like oh my, like I'm telling you that is exactly what you're describing. You'd be so interested in that. That changed my whole life.
Wicked. Okay, cool. I'll definitely give it a read. It's a contemporary, I'm guessing.
He's dead, but he's a Canadian theorist of the 60s, 70s. But he's pretty famous. He's like in sociology, I think he's mandatory.
Okay, sick.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's pretty rad. No, but you said, like, in terms of psychoanalysis, there is like a kind of school of thought that kind of attacks psychoanalysis a lot, which I find interesting. But I wouldn't say I know enough to really like explain it to people that well, everything. But like, I've been really into Deleuze and Guattari.
Exactly. Yeah.
And they kind of they attack psychoanalysis pretty hard.
Yeah, exactly. I've tried to read Anti-Oedipus, and I just don't get it.
Me too, man. Like I actually, yeah, yeah, it's so difficult. Like, yeah, I really had. There's Todd May, who's like kind of a guy who writes guidebooks, type stuff like that. But he has an intro to Deleuze, and that's what helped me, because Anti-Oedipus is just impossible. I mean, in my, I touched on Deleuze a bit in my Psychology of Fascism video.
Yeah.
In that video, really the reason why I did that is because there was a few articles I read which kind of tied Wilhelm Reich.
Yeah.
And originally that video was just on Wilhelm Reich, because Mass Psychology of Fascism is one of my favorite books. And I just kind of saw a link, but one thing I didn't really clarify in that video is that when Deleuze and Guattari talk about desire, they're not talking about sexual desire. Mm-hmm. Like they look at desire in a like libido in a very kind of broad sense. Like
exactly.
What makes sense to me is like kind of like, you know, dopamine to an extent, like your drive.
Yeah. And again, that's one of the, because again with Lacan, one of the, and in terms of desire, I totally get it, right? Because Lacanian, in a Lacanian sense. And it's very Buddhist in a way.
Yes, yeah, I've been saying that. Yeah, exactly. Because of lack, like that's a core Buddhist concept, is desire stems from lack, right?
Precisely. And for me, in my life, that's very much the truth. It's like there's an aim, there's a goal, I get there, and it moves. The signpost is constantly moving, and so there's no satisfaction and all that kind of stuff. And the grass is always greener on the other side, X, Y, Z. But there is an element where you could say that this could potentially naturalize certain forms of authority. And I think what Deleuze, that's what I understand Deleuze's project to be, is like breaking away from that and being like, actually, it's because of the fact that you're thinking about desire in this way that is leading to that. Again, from my very little knowledge,
yeah, because it's hard from like, that's another thing that I know. Todd McGowan, who's a guy who explains a lot of Zizek in a podcast. He has a podcast and he's a professor, well-respected thinker. And I remember he has a conversation with Zizek in one of his podcasts, and they were talking about whether leftism can ever really have like a system of, and they're both Lacanians, see, and they're whether the left can have a system of governance that is anti-state, like not, and that's an interesting question, because like I really find it hard to like use a Lacanian lens and to envision something outside of that paradigm.
Yeah,
like a kind of master signifier where it's like there isn't like a daddy in charge. And what's troubling too is you see a lot of Marxist Leninists, right, who kind of worship figures a lot.
Yes.
Like they'll be like Lenin, Mao, Stalin, and stuff. And like I think there's some weight to Marxism, Leninism, and like the third world especially, or the developing world. Not correct to say third world, but meaning it like really sometimes the only option. But it's a little worrying sometimes that people get drawn to the idea of like a vanguard party.
Yeah.
Because it's like, how are we going to decide who that is, first of all? And second, it's like the fact that they want that, it does fit into kind of, daddy paradigm, if you know what I mean.
There's a religiosity to it, they have their saints and you have Saint Luxembourg, Saint Stalin, and the various denominations that come through. And again, this is the general conflict when people on the left talk to Marxist-Leninists, is precisely on this basis, is that.
Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, you kind of.
From this, should we move on from this? Is there new ways of envisioning X, Y, Z?
Yeah, well, I remember. Well, in your song with Space Babies, you kind of perform that debate a little bit.
Exactly right.
Like in that song where it's like you kind of you're playing Kotsky, who I wouldn't. It's not really anti-state actually, but is was against the vanguard party, whereas versus Lenin, who's kind of like, yeah, obviously for that. And Space Babies being also like a good rapper as well. And he's like a I think he's a Maoist. Maoist. And it was kind of interesting, that dynamic right there. Like Space Babies is really dope. Another dope artist like yourself. He's a Marxist-Leninist, whereas I'm kind of, I guess, more like a postmodern Marxist. So I'm not really fully there yet, but I'll have him on this show as well too, because I love, like, honestly, you and Space Babies are the only two people I know who are really doing this like rap theory.
Yeah, he's really about it as well.
Yeah, he has a good flow.
Rate is crazy. He has like a songs on his channel, man.
Yeah, it's surprising. Yeah, for sure. No, but if I would really like to see you do an episode on Adorno.
On Adorno, I'm so ignorant of everyone on the Frankfurt School except for Marcuse. Marcuse simply because I think he hits the nail on the head with literally everything he writes. But I am very, it's unfortunate because I know that Adorno also talks a lot about music. And apparently...
Yeah, you would love Adorno, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Okay.
Maybe you would also hate Adorno, but you would like Adorno.
Beautiful. I'll definitely look into that. I'll definitely look into Adorno. You've given me three very interesting things to look into: Baudrillard, Goffman, and Adorno.
Yeah, and you give me those Iranian rappers and producers also to listen to. That would be really good. But like I just want to quickly touch on this is in your fascist body politics video that you made, because when you talked kind of about how sort of this idea of reason in that everything has to be quantifiable, measurable. This obsession with that, measuring like body measurements or IQ, or that's something that's a big part of Adorno and Horkheimer's project in Dialectic of the Enlightenment.
Right.
Yeah, and kind of like instrumental reason, they kind of argue, which is like, of course, like a product of modernity, sort of gave rise to fascism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah, like
I read it when I was very young. I didn't understand anything, so I just put it aside. But on that note, I do need to revisit.
yeah, they're not the easiest thinkers, but yeah, I would like to see that. That'd be really cool.
Cool.
Like Adorno for sure.
Awesome.
But yeah, it was really nice having you on, man.
Absolute pleasure, Wanda. An absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll probably be a guest again in the future. So yeah, I would recommend the listeners to definitely go check out Artin's channel. Makes really good stuff, and go subscribe to him. And if you enjoyed, please share with your friends. That'd be fantastic.
Baudrillard was the sharpest critic. His work made the plot of the Matrix pivot. But this is no Neo or Morpheus action. This is how humans turn to... In the 1960s, saw technology get so nifty with the digital economy. Information got a size reduction, turned society onto mass consumption. Marx said values the labor involved. Exchange value was the price that it sold. Use value, how it's useful, behold. Sign value never moves all this old. Marxist theory to dust. New order is the brand that you trust. That's Jesus, a butthead and Beavis. Each is a sign that eventually breathes us into the matrix, comparing our signs to see which one of our identities align.